welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today, we're going to be talking about why does grief feel so big? Because if you have ever experienced a significant loss, you know that grief sometimes feels just huge. It's so much more than just being a little sad, right? So we're going to talk about that a bit today and why grief feels so darn big. Before we dive in, I just want to apologize if I sound a little off. I have been really sick all week. Thankfully, I tested negative for COVID multiple times, so I think it's just a run-of-the-mill cold. And this is the first one I've had in years. So it's really hanging on, and it's a humdinger. So yes, I just said humdinger. All right. Let's talk about grief, huh? I mean, that's what this whole podcast is about. So it kind of makes sense for us to talk about grief. Anyway, yeah. So grief feels really big. It feels like it can be bigger than us, bigger than anything we've ever experienced in our life, depending on the grief, right? Let's break that down a little bit and find out why grief feels so big and what we can do about it. So we'll just use, and as I've said multiple times, grief is not always a death. Grief is a loss. Grief is just something that was and is not anymore. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the loss of a loved one. It doesn't have to be the death of a loved one. This could be the loss of a home, pet, job, family circuit, friends. It can be anything that is not death related, but let's just use the death of a person as the example for this week. So if someone has died, you're grieving for them. You grieve them. That loss of them, right? And that's significant. That's big. And it's, even if you didn't necessarily have the best relationship, I will, fully and freely admit, like, my brother and I were not very close. And especially when he passed away, we were not getting along really well. We were kind of fighting a lot. And there's a lot behind that. So we didn't have a great relationship when he passed away. But that doesn't make grieving for him easier. And that doesn't make it not be there. I still grieve losing him. And so it doesn't matter what your relationship was with that person. Once they're gone, you grieve them, things you never got to say to them, wrong. And that's, part of my grief with my brothers. There's some guilt involved. I felt like I never got to tell him I love him, but I know he knew I loved him. But maybe mistakes you've made or things you wish you could have done differently before they were gone. Or even if everything was perfect, just missing them in your life. And your grief is, you're grieving their absence, their non-presence in your absence is what non-presence is, Nikki, in your life. And it's just, and especially if it was a sudden loss, this new unfamiliar space is just huge and dark. And it's an empty void that they've left behind that is in front of you. And especially when the grief is new, it's easy to worry that you're never going to feel better. And they're never coming back. Accepting that they are not coming back can feel so hopeless. And anyway, we'll get onto that. But aside for grieving from the person or thing that you have lost, you're grieving for yourself too. Not just them or the thing that you have lost, but you're grieving for yourself. Perhaps you've lost a bit of your identity with this person, place, or thing that you have lost. Specifically, if it's a job, maybe this job was more than a job. Maybe it was a career. Maybe you worked your whole life to get to where you are and that business closed or you got laid off or something happened and you're no longer at that job. And that job was a huge part of your identity. And that's gone now. So you're kind of grieving the loss of your identity with that position. But also if you lose a spouse, you no longer have that identity of their wife. I mean, you are still their spouse. You're still their husband, wife, significant other, but they're not there anymore. And it'll feel like, am I still his wife? Am I still a wife or husband or significant other, mother, daughter, sibling? Having lost my only brother, like, am I still a sibling? You know, it's you lose that portion of your identity that is tied to the thing that you lost. One big one, when somebody is a caregiver for somebody for a long period of time, be it somebody who is very ill or somebody who is very old. If you're taking care of if you're taking care of a parent and they've gotten, very advanced in years and they end up passing away, but you were their caregiver for the last, 10 to 15 years of their life, that's a significant loss for yourself because you might struggle with, who am I now that I'm not that person's caregiver? If you gave up everything in your life to take care of them and now they're gone, like you have to find yourself again. And that can be really hard, especially if that was, your identity at that time. Aside from yourself, you grieve your normal everyday routine. And that can be the hardest. I know for me, unrelated to grief, when my day-to-day routine is thrown off, it's really difficult for me. I'm really kind of set in my ways. And I like my routine, and when it's thrown off or when I'm on vacation and things just get out of whack, everything just it feels like a dominoes, And your normal routine may be totally upended after a significant loss, especially if it's a job. Or if it's, the loss of somebody you've been caring for a long period of time. Let's say when you drive to work every day, you always drive past the restaurant where you first met your significant other that has now passed. And driving past that every day is now hard. It's not fun anymore. But also your life will change after a significant loss. There's no two ways around that. And you might even use that as a landmark in your life. There was the time before this and the time after this. And you might really grieve your previous life that you had because whatever you lost isn't in it anymore. And that's fully understandable. You also grieve for your future, especially if it's a loss of a person that's close to you. And they're not going to be in your life in the future, and you know that now. You might grieve for what your future will be. Maybe you had all these beautiful plans to take a really awesome 6-month trip around the world with this person. Or if it's not even that grand. Maybe you just plan to spend the rest of your life with a person and they're gone. Or, again, let's use loss of a job as a good example. You had a job that you not only, was part of you and you enjoyed and was part of your personality, but you depended on that income. And you might not be able to continue to afford the lifestyle you have now, and you might have to make a lot of changes in your life, and your future's not going to look like what you had expected. So, you're also grieving your future. You're also grieving, you may have a complete change in your worldview. And this is a little hard. And this is something I deal with a lot because I'm pretty open about myself on this podcast, and I feel like that's important so that other people who might feel these things will feel less alone. But I suffered a significant amount of losses in a small period of time outside of just death loss. I lost a lot of friends. I lost an entire friend group. Because of that, so many of my other relationships have suffered. And someone else who is in my life has recently just kind of stopped talking to me, and I'm still not entirely sure why. But, it's changed my view of friendships and relationships. It's hard for me to trust. I'm being open here. I'm being vulnerable to you guys. I'm pretty open about my trust issues. I'm not shy about mentioning that, but it's hard for me to put value in relationships anymore when I am constantly living in fear that they're going to go away. I've made some new friends in the last few years through hiking and, through some of my other interests, and they're wonderful people. But there's that niggling fear in the back of my brain that they're going to get bored with me or get sick of me and leave. Or they're not going to want to be friends with me anymore, or whatever will happen, and they're just going to be gone. And so it's really hard for me to view any type of relationship the same as I did years ago because I've just lost so many. And I kind of feel like that's normal. I've kind of whined to my husband a lot that I'm lonely. I don't have a ton of friends, and the friends I used to have, it's hard to connect with them anymore because we all have busy lives. And he's like, I beat myself up over it. But he's like, Nikki, it's not you. It's middle-aged. We're middle-aged, and all our friends are middle-aged, and we're all changing, and we have different lives now. It's hard to keep those connections. I mean, how often do I think, oh, I could go out with some friends tonight, but man, that couch and some Netflix sounds so much better. But it's hard for me to view the world the same as I did years ago. So that's a grief. That's something else we're grieving as well. So as I just listed off a whole bunch of griefs you feel when something has, either when someone has died or you've suffered a loss. You grieve that thing, that person. You grieve yourself. You grieve your everyday routine daily life. You grieve the future. You grieve your worldview. So do you see now why grief feels so big and so all-encompassing? If grief was simple, if grief was just so-and-so's passed away and they're not in my life anymore and I miss them like crazy, grief might be a little bit easier. It would still hurt. It would still suck. But if you didn't have all this other crap that went with it, how much you wouldn't need this podcast, and I wouldn't need to be a grief coach. But grief doesn't affect just one thing. It affects everything, especially if it's a significant loss. There is so much more to grief than just the primary loss. So many other losses occur because of it. So that's it. That's why grief feels so big. And how do we deal with that? Well, go back and listen to my episode on how to process your grief. Besides that, first of all, as I always say, recognize this. Recognize that what you're feeling is not just the loss of this one thing or person, right? It's so much more. It's the loss of security. It's the loss of focus. It's the loss of part of yourself. Recognize that and accept it. That's the hard part. Not saying accepting grief is easy, but accept it. And then from there, just try to find out who you are as a person without this, whatever it is you've lost, because you're going to be a different person and you're going to have to get to know yourself all over again. And it's hard and it sucks, but you can do it. Maybe this new person is a better version of you. Take what you can and try to take this as an opportunity to shape the new you that you've always wanted and you've always wanted to see. It'll suck because it'll be without the whatever it is you've lost, but it's a new you. Learn your new you and love your new you. That's a bit of a tongue twister. All right. So that is that. That's why grief feels so big. It was a bit heavy. Just like my sinuses right now. Again, I'm sorry. I can tell I sound nasally. Hopefully next week I'll be feeling a little bit better. And hopefully I don't develop a nasty cough. Well, let's move on to the death deck, shall we? Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm sorry. And now it's time for the death deck. Ooh. Okay. I'm gonna shuffle them up. Oops. Wah! Oh gosh, this deck is really huge. It's hard to not drop them. Okay. Now, I am going to... Well, I'm going to pull from the back part of the deck. Okay. Now. Oh my gosh. Ooh. So this is a multiple choice. Your spouse has died. Would you read their emails and journals? A, yes, I would read anything and everything. B, I would read their emails for practical reasons, but not their journals. Or C, no, I would respect their privacy and not read any of it. Oh, man alive. So I would have to say B for me. Well, first of all, I don't think my husband keeps any journals. I do, and he has very specific instructions to put them in the coffin with me when I go in the retort for cremation. That if I'm being cremated. If I'm being composted, that'll be something else. But they are to be destroyed, not to be read. And I know some people are like, oh no, you should keep those journals for, your future first of all, I don't have children, and any of my other family, they don't need to be reading, because most of my journal it's not what's going on in the world today. It's how I'm processing some terrible things. And I don't need people reading that. But yeah, if it were my husband, I would read his emails for practical reasons. Actually kind of discussed that with my husband, but this is a good reminder for myself as well as all of you, is if you have a trusted individual that you can give your email password to, or have it written down on first of all, change your email password. Okay, the IT person in me has to throw that in there. Change your email password every 3 months. Please do it. But maybe write it down on a piece of paper and have it hidden under your, I don't know, in your shoebox in your closet, somewhere where you two know where it is. For practical reasons, like, a lot of my bank accounts and everything are tied to my email address, and he might need that. But also, people might email me that not know I'm dead. And he'll need to say, okay, well, there's somebody else we need to notify that Nikki is gone. So that's a very practical thing, you guys. When I talk about living wills and financial wills, and please, my God, get all that together, make an arrangement with somebody who will have access to your email. That's actually, I took an interesting class on electronic accounts and things and death. There's some email companies, Yahoo specifically, will not allow anybody access to anybody else's email, period. Like if I die and I had a Yahoo account and my husband doesn't know the password, he can't contact Yahoo and be like, look, she's dead. Here's a death certificate. I'm her spouse. I'm her power of attorney. Please give me, they won't give you access. There was a Supreme Court case I think it was a Supreme Court case on this. It was somebody in the military who died, and they were investigating, and nobody could get access to his email because it was Yahoo. So get your electronic stuff backed up and have a protocol in place for that too. Okay. I'm jumping down off my soapbox now. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I know this was kind of a heavy one, but I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. All the money I make from my Patreon goes to a fund so that I can provide pro bono work to those who cannot afford my services. You can find me on all the socials. Just look for Nikki the Death Doula. You can find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com. Shoot me a message. Tell me you love or hate my podcast. If you have anything you'd like me to talk about, let me know. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Just remember, you're not alone. Your feelings are valid. Grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief was brought to you by me. You can find me online at nikkithedeathdoula.com. Today's episode was produced by me. Research and scripts written by me. Your host is me. Editing and sound design also me. Music is not me. Music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. License information can be found at filmmusic.io/standard-license. Special thank you to my best friend and husband for constantly reassuring me that I don't suck.